Hey everybody, Black Ninja 797 here, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be doing our very first, and hopefully one of many, Walking Dead ranking videos. I just completed the Walking Dead series on my YouTube channel, playing all the seasons 1 through 4, and it was one of the best series ever. Thank you guys so much. Now we're doing Ghost of Hiroshima, but one of you guys has actually requested the series to keep going in the form of other style videos, for example, such as ranking. One of the things that was recommended to me is ranking all the characters from seasons 1 through 4 from worst to best, and he wanted it on an individual basis. So I decided that that's actually a pretty good idea, and I want to give it a shot. So what I wanted to do, guys, in this video, I wanted to rank all these Season 1 characters from Telltale Games The Walking Dead from worst to best. And if you guys enjoy it enough, I will definitely continue, and that way we can keep The Walking Dead going, because this is one of my favorite series of all time. I know it is for you guys too, and I'm very much looking forward to the idea of this. So if you guys want to see more, please drop a like. If we can end up hitting anywhere around like 5 likes for the very first episode, I will definitely for sure make a new one. But yeah, guys, other than that at the beginning, and other than letting you guys know that we also still will be going to Ghost of Hiroshima, don't worry, but we're just going to be doing this on the side. Alrighty, guys, so let's rank all of our favorite characters in Telltale Games The Walking Dead. Alrighty, guys, so I just want to let you know how I'm going about this ranking video. So with this ranking video, I'm ranking the characters in my personal opinion for what I believe is the worst to the best. However, though, I will definitely end up taking the community and you guys into account. But also, in addition to that, I am ranking the characters solely on how they were portrayed in the season that they are being ranked in. So some characters are in other seasons, but I want to rank them just based off how they were in this specific season, because some characters are more enjoyable than a certain character in other seasons, if that makes any sense. So coming in at our very first spot, and he only is in one season, thank Christ, this is going to end up being my least favorite character in this whole entire series, and this is Larry, Lilly's father. Oh my god, Jesus Christ, Larry is horrible in this series. He is a racist, narcissistic asshole. I hate Larry a lot. And that's an understatement. I don't know about you guys, but Larry is literally the embodiment of a horrible human being. And it shows very clearly. This guy isn't like a likable villain or even like a likable bad guy. He's literally just solely there to be a dick and just annoy you throughout the whole entire series. And I think that honestly he's there just to annoy you, just to see if you go rogue, because he's influencing you and maybe like being like a bad person. That's the only thing I really think that he would have any purpose in being there. Because, like, the very first encounter, he literally wants to murder Duck because he thinks he's bitten and he's just overreacting. It's literally not a good first impression at all. And I love how that unanimously, when I played this game again for the first time in a while, you guys loved hating on Larry, other than Carver, of course. But that was, of course, in Season 2, and therefore we're not ranking Carver. But I will say is that other than Carver, Larry is a dick, and he definitely is deserving of being one of the worst characters, like, ever. They portrayed Larry very well if they wanted him to be at least an asshole. Alrighty, guys, so coming in at the next spot here, this is going to end up being Dr. Logan. Now, if you're wondering who he is, he's the guy in the tapes that you can find on episode 4, especially the ones with Molly in it. And the thing is with him is that he is a doctor from Crawford, and therefore, since he's from Crawford, I assume he's a bad person, and therefore that's why I'm putting him on this list in this spot. I just don't like him in that regard. Alrighty, guys, coming in at our next spot here, this is going to end up being Nate in Russell's story from the 400 Days DLC. I am including the 400 Days DLC in here because I feel like it'd be more better to have it in its own video separately if it was for other things, but for specifically just the characters, I feel like we should combine them because I want to kind of count them all. And for Nate in particular, I don't like this guy because he's essentially a psychotic weirdo. He's got a lot of comments that make me uncomfortable, and I just get this vibe that he's just very dangerous, and that's personally why I don't like Nate. Alright, next is going to end up being Justin from Vince's story in 400 Days. So Justin is the prisoner behind Vince in the back of the prison bus. And the thing is with Justin is that Justin is a rapist. That's actually why he's sent to jail. And the idea behind that just makes me uncomfortable. And plus also it seems like he has no remorse compared to the other person in the front, which is going to be Danny. So when you have the choice between shooting one of their legs to break free from the prison bus, I chose to shoot Justin because Justin being a rapist made me uncomfortable, and I feel like it was the best of the situation. Alrighty, so next on this list is going to be Leanne's wife, and Leanne's wife is actually D-D-E-E. That's how it's spelled, the name. I don't know why. I genuinely thought that it was just B or D, like a single letter, but no, apparently that's just her name is D, D-E-E. And the thing is with D is that she personally, she just is portrayed as a bitch, and tragically she dies at the hands of Bonnie by just sole accident. Like, I'm gonna give spoilers throughout this, guys. I'm assuming if you're watching this you already know what goes on. But yeah, Bonnie kills D on accident, assuming that it's the person that's trying to attack her. And you literally have one of the worst and most gruesome deaths happen to D. But she kind of honestly wasn't really that good of a character anyways, because the way that they portray the 400 Days stories is unfortunately they're short. So unless you get hooked on these characters right away, it's very hard to just like them and even care for them. So I personally don't like D. She didn't really feel like something worth caring about to me personally, and I just don't think she deserves to be high on the list. Alright, so our next character is going to be the woman that you end up finding in the motel in the very first episode of Season 1. This person never has a name, but I just classify her as a character. All she does to contribute to the story is she just ends up having kind of like this moral dilemma for Lee, where she wants someone to kill her or has the ability to kill herself because she's been bitten, and you either have to say okay or no. And it leads into this whole entire thing where you're basically fighting whether or not that you think that she has the right to live or die. And that's really all she contributes to the story. Other than that, there's really nothing else to go off of. She's just kind of there. Alright, now we have Tava. So Tava is at the very end of 400 Days. She's the last playable character that you can use. And she is one of Crawford's henchmen. But the thing is, though, is that we don't know that because 400 Days is supposed to be a kind of like a build up to Season 2, because all these characters from 400 Days can go over to Crawford's place in Season 2. But if I was ranking it based off of that logic, I actually would have her lower on the list, but because she is kind of seeming like she's nice, and I'm trying to imagine this from the perspective of if I played this before Season 2, I would imagine she would be nice if I ended up playing this before Season 2, but since I know what she ends up being, probably a little bit of bias shows through. But I'm trying to rank her as fairly as I can. But at least in the portrayal that she is in 400 Days, she's okay. But that's really all there is to it. Alright, so next is going to end up being Roman from Shell's story. Roman is the guy in the leather jacket. And the things with Roman is that originally he was supposed to be like the good guy leader of the group. But slowly he turns into a bad guy. Kind of like a Negan figure, where to the point where he's killing his own people if they have any sign of betrayal whatsoever in his eyes. So basically it's like either you're with the group 100% or we kill you. So I've come to dislike Roman more than I like him, especially like as I think about it more. I was hoping that he wouldn't be like this because I actually kind of liked him in Shell's story at the beginning, but then he just ended up becoming a normal psychopath leader as usual in The Walking Dead, which we see quite a lot, and so now I just don't like him, and I think he deserves to be lower on the list than he actually could have been. Alrighty guys, so for this spot, I'm clumping every one of these characters together because I essentially just don't care about them. This is going to end up being Boyd, Clive, Joyce, and kind of Stephanie, but not completely Stephanie. But this is pretty much everyone that is in Shell's story. Because with Shell's story, there's a lot of characters that I just don't care about, like, at all. And some of them are actually from Vernon's group in the main story, so I already don't like them because they screw over Kenny and the rest of the guys by stealing the boat. And Shell is really the only likable character in this group, and so unfortunately she kind of goes down a little bit of a peg being associated with this group, but luckily she's still separate from them to the point where I'm not including them all in this giant clump. But yes, I like Shell a little bit more, but for the rest of her group though, they literally all just go right here. I don't like them and I just don't care. Alrighty guys, so the next person on this list is going to be the old man called Walter that gets killed by Nate at the end of Russell's story in 400 Days. This guy I don't assume is a bad guy. I think he just ends up giving this bad persona off because technically he shoots at our character that we play as, Russell in this case. But we all know at the end of the day that Nate's really the bad guy and that the old man was just trying to defend his camp because Nate kept raiding it. So I don't really have a problem with Walter as a bad guy or a good guy. He obviously was just doing what he thought was right, and so he's just kind of a neutral character. Alrighty guys, the next character on this list is going to be Anna. This is the woman that you see in the 2 tape recordings that's with the doctor in episode 4. Really nothing other than the character that we know of is that she ended up being pregnant and was supposed to end up getting an abortion but didn't want to. So it's good to know that she's a caring mother, but unfortunately though this is really all we ever get to go off of and know about her. Alrighty guys, so on the next part of this list, this is going to end up being Leland. This is the guy that is in Bonnie's story that you end up having kind of like an affair almost. I had no idea that Bonnie's story was based essentially off an affair. Now, other than the affair part, Leland compared to his wife, in my opinion, is just much more of an enjoyable character. It might be because he had more dialogue. It might be because that he kind of has a sweet spot for your character that you play as, in this case, Bonnie. But I never really got this horrible vibe from him. Like his wife ends up basically like saying up and down, you're a horrible human being. But even in the worst case scenario at the end of her story where you blatantly kill his wife and admit to it, a lot of people lie. If you murder his wife and tell the truth, it hurts, but he actually somehow manages to forgive you and not kill you or anything. And that takes a lot of balls, and I just respect the fact that he understood that everything was an accident. So it makes me think that this guy genuinely understands where things come from and that life is all about sticking together, and it earns my respect. Alrighty guys, so now back to back we've got Becca, and then we've got Shell. So Becca and Shell are the best characters in Shell's story because they're kind of like a bonded pair. Essentially they are a bonded pair. And even though I don't like Becca with her attitude at the end of her story, Shell's story in this case, she still is one of the more enjoyable characters out of the 400 Days group, and specifically Shell's group in particular, because really other than like maybe one other character, you know, these are essentially the only 2 interesting ones worth of note. So I like Shell, but she's not my favorite, and Becca is okay. If anything, she reminds me of a young, arrogant Carl, because she's a kid, but that's just the way I see things. Hopefully there will be more room and improvement for any future character development stuff such as this for other games in the future. Alright, so next on the list is going to end up being Danny. So Danny is the prisoner in front of Vince in Vince's story in 400 Days. Now, in comparison to Justin, Danny's story for why he's in jail or why he's going to jail is a lot less severe. I think that he is more redeemable of a character because the way they portray him, he seems like he's got some guilt or remorse for what he also did. And he shows empathy towards Vince, and he also doesn't like the idea of people getting killed on the bus. I can feel that he has a compassion about him despite his flaws. And in comparison to Justin, I just like the fact that this guy is more on my side and more of a good guy rather than a bad guy. Because there's not exactly a bad guy in the story other than what you see as a bad guy. Vince's story is more about opinion at the end of the day than actual bad guy, literally. Alrighty guys, so next on this list is going to be Eddie. Eddie is Wyatt's friend in 400 Days, and Eddie, in my opinion, is really funny with his gags and his jokes and kind of overall his comedic sense of his personality. And even though Eddie is a knucklehead and he does abandon Wyatt depending on what path you take in this story, which is a shitty move to end up being in regards to his friend, I mean, like, come on. But overall, at the end of the day, he was just covering his ass, and it's not the worst thing he could have done. So Eddie is funny to a certain degree. I understand where he's coming from despite the fact that it annoyed me. And overall, his character is actually quite enjoyable at the end of the day, not gonna lie. Alrighty guys, so now we are on to our third prisoner, and this is going to end up being Vince. So Vince is responsible for murder, and that's why he ends up getting arrested. You'll see that one of your things that you end up getting busted for is stashing away the gun that you used to murder somebody with. And Vince's story is probably my second favorite, other than I would say Wyatt's. I wouldn't say I like him as the best character out of the 400 Days DLC characters, but he is up there, and I do like his story as one of the most, like top 2. Because I like the Scooby-Doo good cop, bad cop, like drama kind of vibe that they try to do. It's kind of like a crime movie, and I like that about Vince's story. And even though at the end of the day it's not really a happy ending, it still makes his story enjoyable just because of the vibe they're trying to portray. Alrighty guys, now we've got Wyatt, or in this case as I like to call him, Telltale's version of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, because that's honestly the way he looks. It's just like a fat, stoner, hippie, drug dealer version of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Now it's funny too, as well as the fact that he looks like a drug dealer from Scooby-Doo, I like his story. I like the good, like, mystery slash crime vibe that they end up portraying with this. It's kind of like a alternate version, or kind of like what you could say what could have happened with Vince's story. You know, bad guys on the run, except that they don't get arrested. But yeah, ironically, the two cop-related chase scene stories are my favorites. And Wyatt, he portrays the idea of a criminal well. A good criminal, though, at the same time, because a criminal is one thing, but a good criminal is a different thing. And to try to portray that, I'm glad that they were able to pull that off with Wyatt in particular, because not many games can do that very well. Alrighty guys, so now we've got Russell. So Russell from 400 Days, I like him because he seems like he's the most grounded of a character. Not too wussy and not too hard-ass. He's not on the border of psycho like Nate is, of course, but he's also not a softie or a pushover like, let's say, somebody like Sarah from Season 2. He is grounded and he has morals, and he is a character that has a lot of development. He is definitely not flat by any means. Now, it is tragic that he ends up becoming a part of Carver's group in Season 2 and essentially becoming a bad guy. But at the end of the day, though, that was kind of what they were setting this up for. You could tell that this DLC was not really meant for these characters to have happy endings, because really none of them had happy endings. If anything, it was just showing just what other survivors were doing to survive. But I want Russell, out of all the characters, to end up having the best story because he has the most likable character traits. Alright guys, so we're back to the main story. Now, even though this is a bad guy, it's still nice to end up being on the main story once again. So this is going to be, funnily enough, another character called Danny. There was two characters in Telltale's games that were called Danny. But Danny is the one brother in Episode 2 that's a part of the cannibal family. So Danny is the fatter one that you'll see in this scene here where you're sniping with Lee going into the camp. And Danny, I feel like, is the worst out of all the family members. I feel like he's the most psychotic and the most evil. And that's why I don't like Danny, is because he has the least redeemable personality. You can definitely tell he's the most evil. In fact, he's the only one that you can flat out blatantly kill directly, and it has repercussions on Clementine whether or not you do kill him. And so that's why I feel like he's important to the story, but he also is a bad guy at the end of the day, so that's why he's kind of in this dilemma where it's just like, should he go up or should he go down? I don't know. Let me ask you guys, what do you think? Do you think that Danny deserves to be higher on the list or lower on the list? At the end of the day, you know, we all decide. Alright, next is the other brother. This is Andy, or Andrew, and even though Andy, I feel, is the better of the brothers, I still don't like him just because obviously they're cannibals. But at the end of the day, though, you know, I still like the idea of if I'm going to end up being attacked by a cannibal family, I want one at least with morals. And finally, out of our list of cannibals, we end up having Brenda. So Brenda is the mom of the group, and Brenda obviously doesn't want to kill everyone. She wants to have some people that she gets along with. Like, for example, she won't end up killing Lee when you're trying to end up saving Katja, unless you end up provoking her. She really doesn't want to kill Lee. She ends up, obviously, like, eating Marcus, but she does have some morals, and so, therefore, she's a less horrible cannibal? It's weird. I know I'm putting morals on somebody that you really wouldn't expect to end up having morals on, but it's funny. Bad guys do have morals, too, and some of them have an issue with others, and sometimes they end up having no issues with certain things. It's funny. At the end of the day, everyone's just perception is different. So Brenda, in this regard, at least she doesn't want to kill Lee, and therefore she doesn't have some bad qualities like her sons do. But she is still a psycho bitch, though. Alright, now we have Joleen. So Joleen was only ever featured technically twice, but you only ever see her in person once. She is the lady with the crossbow at the camp with you and Danny. And she is the one that is essentially going around being like the crazy scavenger lady. You know, the threat that you don't know is actually secretly not a threat, at least in regards to, in comparison to Danny. Like, this episode, the whole entire idea is they were trying to paint her and her group as the bad guys, but in reality it was Danny and everybody else because they were cannibals. You'll pay attention to her dialogue and you'll be like, oh yeah, she was trying to basically rat out the the cannibalistic family. So to a certain degree, she's not the worst in comparison to them, but she was trying to talk about like shooting my ball sack with a crossbow. So I mean, not the most perfect person in the world. So thank God she is kind of dead. Alright guys, so for our last 400 Days character, or at least the main one basically, this is going to end up being Bonnie. Now, I'm almost 100% certain that I'm getting influence from her portrayal in Season 2, because she has a much bigger role in Season 2. But, I mean, can you really blame me, though? She was an important character in Season 2, because really she's the only one that ends up having a moral compass from Season 2. The only one that really stays technically a good guy throughout the whole entire time. Now, yes, I understand this kind of does go against my promise about saying that, yes, we're only going to be ranking them off of their season portrayal. And Season 1, she's not portrayed the best. She has basically a dark story and really not likable qualities in any regard. But I try to look for the qualities that they did show, predominantly at the beginning, essentially, where she was flirting, because I feel like that's the real Bonnie, because you can see those same traits, even though they're not necessarily specifically flirting, that carry over to Season 2. So, might be a little bit of a bias, but I think that in my eyes, that Bonnie is one of the best characters. So let me know what you think in comparison. Do you like Vince, Wyatt, Russell, Shell, or Bonnie the most out of the 400 Days crew? Alrighty guys, the next characters on this list is going to end up being Ben's friends, David and Travis. These are the guys that you end up finding at the very beginning of episode 2, Starve for Help. David is the one that's going to end up being stuck in the bear trap, and Travis is just the other friend standing up. They both inevitably die, but they contribute to Ben's character development because he's the only real family that Ben has, other than the main group, that you ever get to see. Now, unfortunately, they are like Ben, where they're basically like just kind of like, oh, good for nothings. They're just essentially dead weight, but they're not the worst characters because they're not evil, and they could definitely be a lot worse. Trust me, there's some really shitty characters in this series. Now, you would be surprised to see this guy on the list so low, but really, there's nowhere else to put him just because we're starting to get to the point where we're getting to the characters that are like either going to be moderate to really good. And for this guy, he just doesn't suffice as a top like 10 character at all, or even like really like the top few. But he is a very important character to the story because even though you only will ever see him truly once, he plays a big role. This is the stranger at the very last episode in episode 5. The stranger, I call him that because we never find out his true name, but he's the guy that essentially kidnaps Clementine. And this is the like last hurrah for like you to play as Lee and end up kicking some ass. And this guy is, how do I say this? He's good with some things, but really psychotic in some other things. He points out things like that he is a dad and that he wanted to take care of his family and that he blames us for the car with food being stolen back in episode 2, and that he felt bad for when his family died and they were missing. But then he's also got like things where his wife's dead head is in a bowling bag and you don't know that until later, and he like talks to it and he kidnaps children trying to like fill in the role of another family member. He is nuts. But despite him being nuts, he plays one of the last hurrahs for Lee and allows us to be able to save basically our video game daughter because we get to fight him. Alright, next on this list is Bree. Now, Bree has a very short span in this episode that you're seeing right here, but she does have some of her parts throughout this episode where she is trying to help you out being a part of Vernon's group and trying to end up getting into Crawford and getting supplies for the mutual benefit of both groups. But other than that, she's just essentially a side character. Alright, now we got Vernon. So Vernon is a good guy all the way up until the end, and then he turns. He essentially betrays you by stealing the boat. That's like the main focal point about why he ends up becoming a bad guy. But other than that, he is a good guy throughout the episodes that he is in. He helps you end up getting into Crawford. He ends up understanding where you're coming from, wants to contribute. He heals Omid up because he is a doctor. But he does screw you by stealing the boat. So I don't blame him for what he did. He was obviously trying to do what he was doing right by his group. But I am still pissed at him because it affects my group, and it was a dick move for him to do. So I understand what he did, I just don't agree with it. That's all I really say at the end of the day for Vernon. Alrighty guys, next is going to be Herschel. Now, Herschel is one of the few characters that's from the comics and the TV shows that's also in the games. Because for those of you guys that don't know, the comics and the video games and the TV show are all in one. They're all in the same universe. Now, Herschel, at least in his video game portrayal, I want to honestly say he's kind of a letdown. I liked him in the comics and I liked him in the TV show more. Best version was the TV show, second best was probably the comics. And then my least favorite is the video game. I don't like Herschel as much as I would care for him in the video game, but it's just kind of cool to end up having him in here because I know it's Herschel. So it's just because it's Herschel alone is why I put him higher in the list, but I wish they would have portrayed him so much better. I know it sounds really weird having bad complaints about him and then saying he's high on the list, but it's Herschel. I mean, it's just not in the best light of what he could be. That's really all it is at the end of the day. Alrighty, now we have got another character in here, and no, it's not Lee quite yet. It's actually going to be the cop that takes Lee to prison at the very, very first scene. I never understood who this guy was, or even really what he was doing other than obviously just taking Lee to jail. But for some weird reason, I'm actually kind of interested in this cop character. I kind of want to know what he would have done if he would have lived. I kind of want to know what would have happened if, you know, Lee managed to end up being around this guy a little bit longer because he just seemed interesting. You can have some pretty decent dialogue with this cop in the first scene alone. Like, before the car crashes and he dies, you have a decent amount of dialogue that you can end up talking about him with. You can socialize, you can do the, you know, the silent treatment, but eventually he will end up talking or revealing dialogue, and it's pretty decent when he reveals. I think the cop contributes and is kind of underrated in my opinion, even though he really doesn't have a name to go off of, and he's just only ever in just the one scene. For some reason, just I have a strange thing where I feel like he could have done more. Alright guys, so these are our last few characters that are in like the middle tier. We had our bad characters, we've had our black characters, we've had our okay characters, and now we're finishing up the okay characters with the last two. This is going to end up being Chet and Sean. So Chet and Sean are mediocre, but they're on par with about the most on par you can get. They're not terrible, they're on the top of just mediocre. One of them is obviously Herschel's son, Sean, and then Chet is the friend. These guys help you out at the very beginning with, you know, hooking you up with a car to be able to get away from Clem's house and essentially rescuing the two of you. So a very good act of kindness, and even though we never end up seeing whatever happens to Chet in particular, we know that Sean dies trying to end up taking care of the farm and setting up a perimeter. So they already were smart and they knew what was going on. It's just that since it was the beginning of the apocalypse, they were kind of down on their luck, and unfortunately one of them dies. But I really am curious what ever happened to Chet. Who knows, maybe he is in the canon somewhere and we just don't know it. Maybe in the Clementine comics that are coming out soon. Maybe something like that will happen. Alrighty guys, so this is where we start to get into the best characters. The best of the villains and the best of the good guys. Coming in at our next spot here, this is Lilly. Lilly is the only character in the bad guy slot that actually is deserving to be up in the almost top 10s. Lilly ends up being a focal point in both Season 1 and 4 very drastically. In Season 1, she's kind of like the anti... I don't want to say hero. She's not a hero, but she's definitely not quite a villain yet like she is in Season 4. But she's just this person that bends the rules. She has a lot of compelling good and bad qualities about her, and I like the Season 1 portrayal of Lilly honestly the best. In Season 4, she was the villain, of course, so you're going to be more inclined to hate her because she's against you. But I don't quite see the appeal in hating her in Season 1. A lot of people didn't like Lilly in Season 1, and I get that. I really do. I understand that she ends up killing Carly and or Doug, depending on what happens. But she's not as bad as she could be like she is in Season 4. In fact, I would say, other than the fact that just the bad things that happen to her, such as her dad dying, and the fact that she can be abandoned depending on what path you choose, because that is important in later seasons, she's just a normal person. I'm not saying she's excused for anything she did, especially the fact that she killed Carly and or Doug, but she's not as bad as people make her out to be. She's a good, just unstable character. She's likable and dislikable at the exact same time. She's the worst through her dad and the best through how you treat her as Lee. I like that. You can essentially make her a good or a bad person based off of how you play, and that's cool because it's not just a character you just get screwed with. You pick their story almost indirectly through your actions, or in this case, influence. Alrighty guys, now we're on to Ben. So Ben, where do I go with Ben? Ben is a character that I do not like. For the most part, I don't like him. But he does have one scene in particular that I respect. It's the very, close end to his life, where it's in the final episode, and he's arguing with Kenny. And Ben is definitely a pushover. He's screwed the group over a lot. And he definitely is very annoying. Trust me, I don't like Ben as much as the next guy. But the one reason about why I put him up higher on the list is because I know what he could have been. Now, I understand that sounds a little BS. You want to rank them for how they are, not what they could have been. But I think it's fair to say what they could have been. But I like to think of what they would be as if they were an IRL person. The idea behind the game is we're trying to imagine this as a real life. It's a story. And I can see Ben being a character in a real life scenario. That one coward kid that screws over the group a lot. But this kid ends up becoming a man eventually and standing up at the very end. Even though, yes, he does inevitably die and die in kind of a stupid and cruel way, he tries to redeem himself at the very end. He's almost like the one ginger stepbrother, and I don't remember what his name was, in Game of Thrones. The one guy that ends up like trying to become like a ruler and gets like kidnapped by the one dude. And then ends up like being free towards like the second to last season and ends up getting killed by the Ice King. You guys know that kid. I don't remember because I haven't watched Game of Thrones because I forgot, because honestly I just tuned it out because of the bad ending. But you know exactly what I'm talking about. Ben is like the ginger kid in Game of Thrones, that one stepbrother. That's exactly what I imagine him, but less medieval, of course, and more apocalyptic. Alrighty guys, now I feel like we're on to a character that was very mishandled because they should have had him in actually more episodes. This is going to end up being Mark. Mark was only ever in episode 2. Now, we don't know his origins because he is a part of the group off camera, actually. And Mark is a ex-military veteran, which is really useful because he has the ideas of what can end up keeping the group not only safe, but also equipped. And that's cool. That's convenient. I mean, I would love to end up having an ex-military guy, you know, like specifically ex-military guy, because I feel like military in a zombie apocalypse, like active military, those guys are usually the ones that are nuts, lining people up and shooting them. But this guy is just an ex-military veteran, so he's humanized again, but he knows everything through his experience. So Mark, I feel like, could have been very useful. It just sucks that he was only ever in one episode, gets killed in a crappy way, and you don't know his origin story. I really wish they would have used him more. Alrighty, next is Glenn. I feel like that out of all the characters that they portrayed in terms of crossover with the game and the movies and, you know, the TV shows and the comics, Glenn is definitely the second best. Other than Jesus, because Jesus is in Season 3, we're not going to count him. But if we're talking about specifically Season 1, Glenn's the best. Glenn is definitely by far handled very well. He seems genuine, he seems realistic, and it feels like Glenn just in the games. Very, very convincing, and I'm glad that they not only nailed his portrayal, but they honored and did the fan service to make sure that his character was done right. Like, in comparison to, for example, Herschel. Herschel, I feel like, was just in there to be in there, but Glenn is done right, and I feel like I'm playing the games with that influence of the TV shows and comics. Alrighty guys, so next is Doug. Now, Doug, I originally, in my first playthrough, actually saved him in comparison to Carly. And the thing is with Doug, right, is that Doug, I feel like, is underrated. A lot of people, I feel like, pick Carly. Now, I understand why people pick Carly, and I understand why people pick Carly. In fact, I agree that Carly is better now, by the way, because originally, before, I didn't like Carly, but now I understand because I picked her the second time around. I can appreciate her character more. I'll get into that later when I rank Carly. But Doug, I still feel like, is underrated. I feel like that the reason why I didn't pick Carly is kind of the same reason why people don't pick Doug. And that's that they just think that at first glance, they're just kind of just a average character. But if you use Doug properly, like if you actually take advantage of the dialogue instead of just getting the bare minimum amount of information, because Season 1 definitely did a lot with dialogue. There was more dialogue in the earlier seasons than there was later, rather than just cinematics. If you end up talking to Doug, like really talking to Doug and getting to know him on a personal level, he's smart and he's actually quite likable. Like, you'll even understand why that Carly, if you actually notice this in the story, Carly, to a certain degree, has a crush on Doug. It's funny, like, Doug actually saves Carly in the story. You'll find that out from one of the two of them. And that makes her have a crush on him, kind of like a superhero logic. And I like that. I like how that you get to, for some reason, find out this little bit of dialogue that almost is kind of kept secretive. And it's very juicy. It's like reading a gossip magazine. It's kind of fun. I like it. Alrighty guys, we're in the top 10. So coming in at number 10, this is Katja. So Kenny's wife. Kenny's wife, Katja, is a likable character in my eyes is because she's kind, she's loyal, she's loving. My only big takeaway from her is unfortunately she does kill herself because of, Duck dying at the very end of Season 1, Episode 3. But, other than the way she dies, she's a likable character through and through. She takes care of people, she understands people, and she's always loyal to not only Kenny, but also everybody else. She's not just blind to her own family, she looks out for everybody. And she's that mother figure that's great for someone like young Clementine. I feel like that if Katja wasn't there to be kind of like the mom figure, it would be very hard for Clem to grow up. I'm glad that Kenny's family almost acted like the surrogate family for Clem, because other than Lee, Clem didn't have really anybody to get along with because everyone was all adults. So she had Duck as like a friend or a brother, Katja as kind of like a mom or an aunt figure, and then Kenny like as an uncle. So that was kind of cool to get that for her. Alrighty guys, and shortly thereafter, we're ranking Duck. So Duck, oh my gosh, Duck, and Goose. Bazinga. Anyway, so Duck in this game, I never really did like him at first because he doesn't really have much to go off of. He's just a kid. But there's some bits that I like about Duck. So you can end up having it where in the last episode he's featured in episode 3, when you're trying to figure out who's been getting rid of the medicine at the motel, you can end up having Duck investigate and help you out, and it feels like that Scooby-Doo logic again, kind of like why I liked the 400 Days episodes that had the same Scooby-Doo vibes. And Duck is a great figure for a friend slash brother for Clementine. I actually just thought about this a few minutes ago, but I always did wonder to a certain degree about what it would be like if other characters lived. Just recently, I thought about what would happen if Duck lived. What if Duck actually managed to end up growing up and being a teenager slash young adult like Clementine in the later seasons? Now, that might have affected Kenny's story differently in later seasons, but it would just be kind of cool to imagine a older Duck if he would have lived. Alrighty guys, next is Chuck. Now, even though Chuck is only ever in literally one episode, I mean, he is in technically 2, but he doesn't really have a big role in the second one. But the thing is with Chuck is that even though Chuck plays a small scene role, he plays a massive moral role in it. He teaches Lee that Clementine needs to end up being more than just a little girl. She needs to grow up and be a badass woman, basically trying to survive and be like any other survivor, because you can't just blindly protect the kids and just make them only kids. You gotta show them how to be a survivor. And Chuck showed Lee that, and so Lee was able to show Clementine that. Chuck showed Lee that, Clementine needs to end up being a survivor. So he basically, through Chuck, taught Clementine how to shoot, cut her hair, and be a survivor. And for that, I respect Chuck, and I'm glad. I mean, I don't know if Lee would have came up with that on his own, or at least not before it could have possibly been too late. So shout out to Chuck for being that responsible, wise old man. Alrighty guys, next on this list is going to end up being Molly. Molly, I feel like, is also a very underrated character. I wish she would have came back in later seasons because she was so fun and badass. She is a character that you have a lot of mystery behind. Like, for example, the tapes, like in episode 4. That's an Easter egg in my eyes, because when it comes to that, you had to really look for that. In Season 1, there was nothing just given to you on a silver platter. Other than, Season 4 with the collectibles, really Season 1 was the other season that you end up having to dig around to find out a lot about stuff. So, let me explain. For Molly's story, she was a part of Crawford, and basically a person that escaped before she either became corrupt or became a bad guy. And she is badass and has ways of being able to protect her and others without being a pushover or evil. And I like that a lot about her. She doesn't like, for example, let Kenny push her around, but she doesn't also end up trying to murder Kenny or anything. I mean, she does a drop kick sweep there. I mean, that's an example of how cool she is. She's basically like a ninja. But yeah, I feel like they underutilized her character, and I really, really wish she would have stayed a part of the main group and maybe was almost kind of like a sister figure for Clementine, although we did get that kind of through Jane. Alrighty guys, so in our next spot here, this is Carly. So I would have not done this a few years ago. In fact, personally, in my opinion, back in the day, I didn't like Carly really at all. The reason why I picked Doug is because I thought that Carly was almost like a bitch. and that she would rat me out, because if you remember, she said she's a news reporter and she knew about Lee's backstory, and I felt like that she would use that against me, at least the way that I was portrayed in my 12-year-old head, because I played the first season when I was 12 years old. So in my head, I thought that she was going to rat me out. But playing this once again as an adult, I realized that she wasn't exactly trying to threaten me. She was trying to make me realize that I need to open up and actually embrace who I am and not necessarily be reclusive and hide. I needed to let people know who I really was, or in this case, Lee. And she becomes not only loyal to you if you decide to take that path, she also becomes, like, loving towards you. I thought that she was just going to be another character, but she eventually becomes, like, flirtatious, and she even kisses Lee at one point. At least on my second playthrough she did. So it would have been really cool if there was a dynamic relationship between who you decide to be with, kind of like what they did with later seasons with Clem, but they did that with Lee instead, you know what I mean? That would have been really fun. Alrighty guys, here are the absolute best. These are the top 5. Coming in at number 5, this is Krista. Krista is one of the best characters because she's so likable in so many different ways. She's badass. She's kind and loving towards people like Clementine. She is very, very intelligent. She knows how to survive. I really honestly think that she never died in Season 2. I think that at the end of her last ever feature, in the first episode of Season 2, where her and Clem get separated, I don't think she ever died. I think she just had an off-can survival thing, and I think that she's still doing well. I think that she would have ended up becoming a survivor and just would have went with other groups, kind of just like how Clem would, but just by herself and as an adult. And she would have went off and done her own thing. Now, it's funny, I don't know if you guys knew this, but this was actually a scrapped idea for Telltale. But they did originally consider having Krista be the enemy of Season 4 against Clementine rather than Lilly. And I feel like that was better that they did Lilly rather than Krista. But it's an interesting thing to think that they would have ended up having a possibility where Krista might have been an enemy. And therefore, technically, they did have plans to make her survive. It was interesting. Alrighty, next we've got our boy Omid. I love Omid. I really, really do. I was so sad. He was one of the worst deaths I had to witness in this series. I feel like other than, like, Kenny, Luke, and I probably would say, like, Lewis, he was one of the saddest deaths I had to end up seeing in the whole entire series. I hated seeing Omid die, and unfortunately there's nothing you can do about it. It's not like that there's a death that where you have the ability to choose between saving Omid and saving somebody else. He just dies, and I'm so sad that they decided to end up killing Omid, because he really is such a good character, and it would have been so better if they would have actually let him live. I really, really wish they would have let Omid live. Alrighty guys, coming in at the number 3 spot, this is one of my personal favorite characters, not only in Telltale or in The Walking Dead, but just of all time. This is good old Kenny. Kenny is so amazing. He is basically your best friend in Season 1, and your uncle slash stepfather in Season 2. Kenny is amazing. I love him as a character, especially in his Season 1 portrayal. I feel like they did him dirty in Season 2. They made him a lot darker and a lot more corrupt, and they essentially painted him as a bad guy to a certain degree in Season 2, depending on how you perceived Kenny. That's why you have the option to be able to kill or not kill him at the end with Clem. But I really, really enjoy his Season 1 portrayal because he was much nicer, more kind, and he was there for Lee. He was a good person. He stuck by Lee and saved him, for example, in the drugstore when Larry tried to kill him. He was there for the whole entire time, despite all the death and his family dying around him. He stuck with Lee and Clementine and everybody at the very end. And he even sacrifices himself to save Ben, the person that was responsible for his family dying, depending on the path you can take. Kenny was such a likable character in Season 1, and I love him for that. And I really, really hope one day that alongside some other voice actors, I could meet the person that played Kenny. I really, really wish that would be, that'd be a thing. I really would love to meet Kenny. Now, guys, this decision was really, really hard to do because I love these last 2 characters so fucking much. But I had to end up putting Lee at number 2. I love Lee so much, and I would love to put him at number 1, but there's just obviously one last character that deserves him more than him because of so many different reasons. But let's talk about Lee and why he ends up the least deserving to be number 2. Lee is a embodiment of a fucking badass. This man does not die until literally he decides to die. He didn't die until he asked Clem to kill him. He fought tooth and nail. I use this scene in particular describing Lee when I'm describing him as a fucking badass, because this guy has got his arm fucking chopped off and is on death's door, and he's fighting to save his basically surrogate daughter. Nothing, in my opinion, will ever be able to recreate the first incarnation of Lee, and I am so glad that he just exists as a character. I would love to be like him one day. Alrighty guys, coming in at number 1, my all-time favorite video game character ever. This is Clementine. I mean, what were you expecting, guys? I have the hat of Clementine, for Christ's sake. You guys know. And, I mean, who doesn't like Clementine? She's one of the most likable, iconic video games characters ever. She's cute, and she's sweet, and so freaking adorable in Season 1. I literally look at her as literally my fictional daughter. I love Clementine in Season 1. My absolute favorite version of Clem is in Season 1. I love how we get to see her grow up in other seasons and become from cute, innocent little girl to awesome, badass mother when she takes care of AJ. Clementine deserves the best, and I'm so glad that not only did her story not end at the end of the last season, but that's going to be continuing on once again in the comics. Thank you, Telltale. Thank you, Skybound. Thank you, Robert Kirkman. Thank you, everyone in the Walking Dead universe, for making one of the best characters ever. So yeah, guys, that's going to be it here for today's video. I truly hope you guys end up enjoying. If you did, please consider dropping a like, comment, and subscribe, especially for Clementine. But yeah, guys, I have spent the last several hours on this video trying to make sure that not only I do this right by you guys, but that I make it fun and enjoyable. So if you guys could please show your support, just once again, please drop a like. If we can end up hitting 5, that would be definitely amazing. But yeah, guys, I have very much enjoyed playing The Walking Dead. Thank you for allowing me to be able to post my all-time favorite video game series of all time onto the channel, and thank you for being a part of it with me. I'm very much looking forward to hopefully making more videos like this. Look forward to obviously some other gameplay, stuff like that coming soon, like Ghost of Hiroshima, just my normal videos. But yeah, guys, I hope that this is the beginning of a brand new series we can do, because I'm always looking forward to doing something new. Because remember, guys, at the end of the day, this is just the beginning. I hope you guys end up enjoying, and I hope you enjoyed another YouTube video from the most unique YouTuber you guys are ever going to see. Thank you for watching, guys, and peace out.